And now Professor Oguedan will kick us off with a small welcome address, and then we will go into the main session. Thank you very much, everyone. We hope that it's a really enjoyable session for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Olive, for the comprehensive explanation on what we are going into. And everybody is welcomed on behalf of the ACD President, Professor Tayyab Ayati, who is also the Vice Chancellor of the Open University of Sudan. You are welcome as we prepare for the Zoom webinar with topic assessment and feedback, how to optimize feedback to students on their assignment in order to promote motivation and engagement. I sincerely commend everybody for participating in this new experience of how to move our teaching online. I observed that while some participants have made tremendous progress, others are still making efforts to navigate the hurdles of assessing the course content for learning. Please let us encourage one another anytime somebody requires support. Note that the struggle and the achievements are part of the experience we all need to go through in order to have a feel of what our learners will also be going through in the future. However, I want us to take note of the following. The program demands that we need time to set aside, enough time to set aside for ourselves and for the task. We need to be devoted to the task and pay total attention to the study. Remember to visit the website only when you are relaxed and ready to spare your time so that you will be able to accomplish your goal. Please remember that you need to be patient in your activities. I want us to note that if some of us are able to cope with the challenges successfully and have made remarkable progress, then everybody can participate and achieve good results. All that we need is patience, commitment, and focus. Once again, I encourage us to keep being focused and to work together by encouraging one another. I'm sure that the webinar of today shall be an interesting experience, but let us move a step further by doing what is expected of us on the website so that our efforts can be placed on record with proofs that as educators, we are able to render our services in a professional way, which the circumstance of today demands. There should be no damping enthusiasm, but rather, we should set clear expectations of today's webinar, which will focus on feedback types, importance, outcomes, effectiveness, in line with week 1 of the tertiary educator program course. It won't focus on ways of conducting assessments online. So not so much innovative ways of assessing will be involved. We will run a separate session on this later in the program in August. Giving effective feedback is a key precursor. Once again, you are all welcome to participate in the interesting experience that is hereby presented. You are welcome.
Thank you, Professor. And now over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Professor Oguedan and Rachel. If you could start the slides, I think we're at the right point for that. It's really good to see so many of you again, and to have another chance to discuss with you. And as Ollie has said, there'll be some more opportunities for interaction and discussion today. I am just going to talk a little bit about how the topic of assessment is going to be covered in this course, because today is only one event and there's only so much we can talk about. So assessment is a really big topic, and we know from discussions with you and questions already that is something that really matters. In this session, we will focus primarily on the topic of feedback, so feedback from assessment, And this is particularly important in online teaching, where the students aren't visible and there may be less communication with the teachers, but also with other students. My colleague, Professor Denise Whitelock, will give a presentation and lead some activities around this. After that, we will have a short discussion in which we will address in brief some of the questions that were raised in the introductory webinar session. So we pulled out some of your questions from the chat in that session, and we will talk about them as a group. So there will also be, as Professor Oghedan said, we will put in some extra sessions which will talk about other areas of assessment. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Professor Denise Whitelock, who is the Director of the Institute of Educational Technology, and her research has involved leading some really interesting projects around assessment and feedback in online learning. I'm now very happy to hand over to Denise, and Rachel can move to the next slide.
Hello everyone, it is a great pleasure to be with you and to tell you something about my own research, where I'm very, what is dear to my heart is assessment and feedback. And we need to think about, when we don't see our students, how important the feedback is and how important assessment is to our students. So let's have a look at the of assessment. Would you move to the next slide, please? Now, we know from years of research, and we all know when we're teaching students, that assessment drives learning. What's going to be on the test is what I want to pay attention to. And Derek Rowntree, who was one of the first academics in IET at the Open University in the UK, wrote a very important book about assessment, driving that lesson home to all of us. And in the UK, we have a national student survey every year. And in that, we know clearly that students want more feedback, they want more timely feedback, and they really want to be able to receive more help with their studies with that feedback. So what I want to introduce you to, and for us to discuss today, is about how do the models embedded within e-feedback systems inform and enhance current practice. And if we move to the next slide, I want to bring our attention to what assessment feels like for students. Now, Chris McKillop was a doctoral student, started work with us, and she was looking at students, how students feel about assessment, and she asked them to write some narratives. And she didn't get very far with that, but when she asked them to do some drawing of how they felt, you can see, here's an example of one of them, that assessment is a big, arduous journey up steep steps to find what you want at the end. There's the golden cup at the end. And she said here in this particular diagram, be careful of the edges because you could slip off. So assessment is stressful, and we might not always be aware of the stress our students are under during assessment. If we move to the next slide, I'm going to introduce you to an activity where you are going to move into your different rooms. And what I want you to think about is what you're checking when you're marking a student's essay, marking their work. And we have some questions we'd like you to address. You know, what are the generic features you're checking? And what type of feedback would you give for these features? So we're now going to split up into separate small breakout rooms to discuss these questions. And when you're in your breakout room, you may find it easier to have one of you lead the discussion. So you've got 15 minutes, and then we'll give you a 1-minute warning, and we'll come back together again. So I wish you a very good discussion together.
Okay, I'm sending everyone to their rooms now. Does that work?
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Sorry.
Hello.
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 Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Hello, good afternoon.
Everyone.
Can somebody moderate
Hello.
everyone? The chairman and the secretary. And I'm who this
Everyone.
afternoon. Appoint the chairman and the secretary, please. Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Quickly appoint the chairman to direct the affairs.
We can go ahead with appointment.
Mute your microphones, please.
Appointment of the chairman.
Sorry,
Dr.
please bear.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. We seem to be having a small technical issue. Excuse me. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, everybody. Hello.
Everybody, so that
Hello, everybody. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you.
We seem to be having a small technical issue with getting the breakout rooms to work. So I'm sorry for that. We're going to try it one more time, but if not, we might need to come up with an alternative. Let's just try it one more time. All right, so colleagues in the main room, we will be our own breakout room. So if you open the chat box, you will see the discussion question. And the direction was that one person should coordinate. So who would like to coordinate this discussion here in the main room, please? Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello, everybody. Can you hear me in the main room?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so I think what we've done is we've divided up the big session of 500 people into breakout rooms. And those of us left here are the final breakout room. So we need one of you to act as the coordinator for this discussion. And if you look at the chat, you have the question that is to be discussed. What are the generic features that you are checking in your students' essays and work when you mark them? What type of feedback would you normally give in respect to each of these features? So could we have a coordinator, please? Would someone like to coordinate the discussion, please, and chair the discussion? Hello? If you can hear me.
What is the student answering what I have asked? Something.
Your students' essays.
You look at logic.
Logic, the argument, the strength of the argument, yep.
Yes, the strength of the argument.
Okay.
Yeah, hello. Hello.
Yes, hello, Philip.
Yes, if there is a question that involves calculations, you also look at if they are following the right procedure in the calculation, and whether the final answer is correct or not.
Obviously,
yes.
yeah, that's an important one, but it's important not to miss it. So, Philip, the second part of this question is, what type of feedback would you normally give in respect to each of these features? So, in the case of the method and the correct answer, what kind of feedback would you then give, whether it's face-to-face or in a written assignment or online? What kind of feedback would you normally give in respect to these features?
Yes, for the procedure, if the procedure is correct, usually I mark it correct. And then the feedback is that the student is correct, and the right score. The right score is given to the student, and then the total score for the assignment is given back to the student.
Yeah.
And if it is face-to-face, then I can say well done, or good job, or excellent, or very good, you have done well, and all that. These are some of the feedbacks I give.
Great. And earlier, Rose, you talked about the concept. So what kind of feedback would you give for that feature? Do you have any examples of feedback that you would generally give? What type of feedback?
Okay, I would underline if it is written, I would underline the point at which the concept has been articulated, and then indicate with a check mark. And if it is weighted, I mark with, let's say, out of 5 it is 5, or out of 5 it is 3 if it is not very well articulated.
Very good.
According to a rule that I would have developed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So rubric-based feedback and marking-based feedback. Yep. Okay. Dr. Matthias, for the feature that you highlighted earlier, what sort of feedback would you give for that feature?
No, you know, when you talk about logic,
yeah,
it talks about the general idea that the student has to display or to explain the concept generally. Now it goes from stage to stage. When you talk about the logic, you start maybe with the general introduction and the cross of the subject. How has the student been able to emphasize the subject matter, and how did it come to a conclusion? So when you look at all of this, when you want to evaluate, you look at the first. subject matter. At that point, looking at the logic, the flow, you'll now be able to know what portion of the percentage or mark we assign to each of these areas. And when you do that, maybe the student may come up to having, maybe from logic, you see 3/5 or 4/5. If the logic is not there, I mean, absolutely say, okay, let's say have 2, because he has attempted some discussions on the whole.
Right. So I think you're talking about marking-based feedback. So marks, you give your feedback based on the marks. Yeah. Okay, let's think about other types of feedback that help our students. There's, you know, all of these are important. Would anybody else like to highlight a generic feature that you check for in your students' assignment and share the type of feedback you used? Who would like to go next? Thank you very much, Rose and Dr. Matthias and our other colleague. I've lost you now in the grid, but thank you very much for your contributions. Anybody else like to share?
Hello, Oliver.
Yes, hello.
This is Dr. Mohammed.
Yes, Dr. Mohammed.
Yes, from University. Thank you very much. I think another way of getting feedback is by taking making observation. Hello?
Yes, hello, go ahead.
Yes, making use of observation. At the end of the exam, you observe the way the students feel when they attempted your question. You know, you get different feedbacks from students who will tell you, oh, I did not get the concept clear. So you'll be able to know whether you actually ask the question based on what you understand, or you ask the question based on what you understand.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Mohammed.
Yes. So you know whether you are asking the question you ask, probably they understand from the perspective of what you have taught them, or you'll be able to clarify whether you are the one just believing that at the end of the day they should be able to answer the following questions. So observing them and their behavioral disposition after the exam is one key way to know how students actually understand what you have assessed them for.
Okay. So the feature is the behavior.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, anybody else? So the questions are, what are the generic features that you check for in your students' essays or work when you mark them, and what type of feedback do you give in respect to that feature? Anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would someone else like to explain what you do? Rose, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. But that's
it also depends on how that you are teaching.
Sorry, Rose, I think there's a sound problem. We've lost your sound. Try again. Now we can hear you. Try again.
Okay, me. I'm saying, as we have said before, you can also look at the skill that the student is also demonstrating. For example, in research methodology, you want to see how they are articulating how to ask appropriate questions. So you want them to be in a situation where they are actually asking and you give them feedback to whether that would be an appropriate way of asking questions or not. Or if it is a skill of presentation, you want them to come and present in class so that you can be able to give them feedback about how they have articulated themselves in terms of their voice, their presentation, because we are also training. So the whole lot of the different aspects of what you are actually looking for in the training or in the learning process, the learning outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. So I think it's interesting. Some of our features focus around the exam performance and results, but other features we've been discussing revolve around the method and the argument and the logic demonstrated and the skills demonstrated. And I think some of the features around skills and logic can start to be demonstrated even before the exams, when we as lecturers and educators assign students various tasks in preparation for the exam. There's a real key time there, a key opportunity to help them prepare well for the exam by giving them constructive feedback and feedback that will help them and challenge them and develop their skills more, that help them understand what are the things they did very well, what are the skills they demonstrated, what are the strong arguments they made, and why was it a strong argument. And then that helps also them to start self-analyzing and critical thinking about what is the weakness of their argument process or their presentation process of their argument and how they could strengthen that weakness, right? Any other features that you as educators, I think we have about 1 minute and then everyone will join us again for the big session. So in the final few seconds, does anyone else want to make a final contribution about what you look for and what you feed back to your students?
Hello. Elizabeth, could you speak on our behalf?
Hello.
Elizabeth.
Yes.
Hello. Yes,
Hello.
go ahead. Elizabeth, talk on our
Elizabeth,
behalf.
go ahead. Elizabeth, you have been nominated by your colleagues.
Okay, now we have breakout room.
Can't hear you, Elizabeth.
There's everything here.
Yeah, please, everybody mute yourself so we can hear together.
I see what they talk.
Hello,
I see
sir.
everything here now.
Hello.
Sorry, there's a lot of background noise.
Everybody,
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, I think some people have not been able to give their feedback.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. I think everyone is joining again, so let's mute our mic. Any feedback remaining, please put it into the chat box. Yeah? So if you still have feedback that you have not yet been able to contribute, please put your contribution into the message box. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. All right. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the main session.
Thank you, Sam.
Let us all mute our mics now, please, so that our presenters can continue with the session. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, we had, we're putting our feedback into the chat, but my group had a fantastic session. And as perhaps you might expect, and you probably discussed in your own states, that what we're looking for when we're checking any assignment is really, did the student answer the question? And then what we're also concerned about is grammar, English, whatever language we're writing in, and the grammar. But obviously, the other main point was organisation and flow. Because if you're writing an essay or an answer, what you're trying to do is tell a good story. And a story's, you know, a good answer's got a beginning, middle, and an end. It has a to it. And also, was chatting about the correctness of the answer, and also perhaps you could mute the mics because we've got a lot of feedback. That would be very helpful, thank you. And also originality, because we don't want people cheating, just taking things out of textbooks or from the internet. And we then had a really interesting discussion about the type of feedback. And what was very telling was when someone says, I let them know, and let my students know what they've done well and how they can improve. And that's particularly important when you don't see your students face to face, because you might have given high marks and the student doesn't know they've done well if you don't praise them, because they don't know what the rest of the class, the marks they've obtained and found. I've given a summary here of what I think went on in the group I was in. If you've
Sorry,
got
Denise.
other...
Sorry, Denise. We need people to mute their microphones because the sound quality is quite poor at the moment because too many of us are not muted. And we're missing a lot of what you're saying, Denise. Yeah. Sorry, Denise, can you unmute yourself since you are presenting? I'm sorry, the only way to mute everyone is to mute all.
Okay.
And maybe, Denise, are you able to speak a little closer to your mic, and maybe that can help drown out some of the background noises we're getting?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better. Thank you, Denise. Sorry.
Right, so I just want to, let me just summarize what we're looking for, and people mentioned very clearly and well, was we're looking at did the students answer the question? Is the content correct? Have they been cheating? You know, is it original? Have they cheated off the web or somewhere else? That's important. Does the essay or assignment have a good flow to it? Because when you're writing an answer, you know, you're telling a story with evidence in your own subject domain. And there needs to be a good flow. What about the grammar and the English? And also how the expression is made, because when we're moving into a new area, a new subject domain, there's a way of talking and writing about it, for example, biology or chemistry or history. So what you're learning as a student is how you can answer in a certain way. And then we talked about types of feedback and making sure the student knows what's correct, what isn't correct, and how to do better. So if we move on to the next slide, please. This was a problem that I was faced with at the university. How were we going to look at the sorts of feedback we give? And don't forget, we've got thousands of students, you know, on a course. And we've got, you know, they're into groups of 20 or 30 with their tutors. And how can we give good feedback and train our tutors to give good feedback? Now, one of the ways to do this is to code all the comments on each TMA, but to find a coding system. Now, Bales was a psychologist in the 50s. He had a wonderful category system which analyzed talk. And the reason I wanted to use Bales' category was it had socio-emotive categories. So it had things about positive reactions and negative reactions. Now, the only other coding scheme that I could find for teaching was Flanders. This was put together in the 1970s, but the categories weren't appropriate because they were really to do with classrooms and classroom control. So this wasn't the written feedback. So if we to the next slide, please, we can see here that that categories are divided into 4 groups. Category A is the positive reactions, and category B are more teaching or directing comments. And category C is to do with questions. For example, we might ask our student that we would like some more information or to clarify a certain area, make it clearer. And there were negative reactions about disagreement. Now, if we move to the next slide, you'll be able to see this complete coding scheme. And of course, you'll have the slides afterwards so you can see and be able to refer to them. So the positive reactions is where you show solidarity, where there's tension release, because in a real life situation, there would be jokes, maybe, and laughing, and showing agreement. Because when you show agreement, you agree, you show you understand, that you accept. And then the category B, I said, was more about teaching. So are you directing, proposing, like we said, showing people where they were right, where they were wrong, evaluating and analyzing what you've seen, and confirming and giving information. Someone said quite rightly, here's some more references, go and have a look at this or whatever. And then there are the questioning sections, requesting orientation, requesting evaluation and analysis, and requesting directions or proposing. And then there are disagreements. And when we're in a distance and teaching online, we train our tutors at the Open University to be very clear about what's right, you know, and showing them and how to, but we don't want to show a lot of disagreement, negativity, because it's very hard when you're not seeing someone and talking to them, when you can't see their expression, to maybe receive anything very, very, very negative, because you might give up and be demotivated. So what I'm going to do now, if we move to the next slide, is we're going to do some polling. And I'm going to hand over to Tim to lead on this section of the presentation. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Denise. Yes, so as we've done in the introductory webinar, we thought we'd use some polls to get a sense of different ideas across the whole group of people here. So it's a bit different when we do the breakout rooms. You get the chat in a small group, but the polls work really well to allow us to get a sense of all of your views. So there's a few questions, and I'll read them out for the benefit of people watching the video who might not, well, won't be able to take part in the polls. But for those of you here today, I'll read them out and you should be able to take part on your screens. So Rachel, move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so on the slide we have 3 questions here. So we're really interested in your perceptions of what students do with feedback. So the first question is, when you return a marked assignment to a student, what do you imagine the majority of students do first? And there's answers to that. And Rachel, it might make sense to just launch the poll now so people can, people can take part, and I'll read out the other questions. Okay, so you're all welcome to take part in the poll. As I said, that was question 1. Question 2 is about what you think students do. So from your experience, select one of the options below that you believe characterizes most of your students' behavior on receiving marked assignments. So it's either they read every comment you make in detail, they read all the comments, they skim through the comments looking for important points, or they often don't read the comments. And then question 3, when do your students read the feedback you've provided them with? So do they read the comments when they get them back, but never again? they read the comments when they get them back and refer to them later. They read the comments later for revision. They read the comments later only, or they don't read the comments. So those are our first three questions, and it'd be really interesting to see all your views on those. So I'll give you a couple of minutes now to make sure we get all the votes in. Yeah, if anybody can't see, you need to scroll down to get to the last question, but I hope you can see them all. And these are obviously in the slides as well. Yes, as someone's mentioned in the chat, you need to use an arrow to slide down. Depends on the device you use and the screen size. Just give it a little bit longer because there's still people coming in, and obviously you've got to answer all three questions before.
Can you take more than one answer?
Question 3 is not showing.
Use arrow.
Scroll down.
Yeah, you should scroll down or use an arrow key. I guess is this on a phone? Okay, we'll just give it another little bit longer, but if you could submit your results as soon as possible, that means we can move on. Okay, and anybody who hasn't finished, if they could just end and complete it now, then we'll end the polling. Okay. So we finished the polling now, and I can share the results with you, Rachel. That's the next step, isn't it? Okay. So we can see here, and I don't know if Denise wants to comment on this. For the first question, the large majority of you think that students read the mark rather than the comments first.
Very similar to other polls that we've taken. So they're interested in the mark. Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Carry on, Tim.
Okay. So the second question, most of you think that, a strong leader is that students skim through the comments looking for the important points. And for the third question, it's a mix between the first three answers, but the most popular one is that you think students read the comments later for revision purposes. Okay, so that's the results of those first three questions. And I think Rachel will move on to the next set. All right. Rachel, do you want to launch the next poll, and I'll read them out for people who can't see them. Okay, so we've got three more questions, and these ones are, sorry, we've got four more questions on this case. These ones are more about the type of comments you get on essays. So comparing a high graded assessment with a low graded one, which one would you expect to attract more positive comments from the tutor? Secondly, comparing a high-graded assessment to a low-graded one, which one would you expect that the tutor would have asked a lot of questions on? Thirdly, comparing a high-grade assessment to a low-graded one, which one would you expect to find the tutor had provided answers and suggestions on? And finally, comparing high-graded assessment and a low-graded one, which one would you expect to find the tutor had written more negative comments on? So we'll give you a chance to answer those 4 questions now. Okay, so we can see results coming in. We'll give you a bit longer because there's 4 questions. It will take a little while for some people to get this one done. Okay, more answers coming in now. I think we'll just give you a little bit longer. We don't want to take too long over this because there's more to come. But just give you another 10 seconds to finish off if you can. Okay. So let's end this here, and I'll share the results with you. So the expectation is that for the first question, a high-graded assessment would get more positive comments. That's quite strong. For the second question, more asking of questions for a low-graded assessment, although quite a few people thought the high-graded assessment might get that. There's quite similar views for high-graded and low-graded assessments on the answers and suggestion. So 40% think high-graded assessment would get more answers and suggestions, and 49% think that low-graded assessments would. And there's quite a strong view that low-graded assessments would get more negative comments. So I don't know if you want to come in and have any commentary on that, Denise.
Well, it's really interesting because this is very similar to, you tried this poll in a number of countries. But what's interesting here is that low-graded assessment would be asking more questions. And this group is the only group that's answered it in this way. And I'm delighted that you have, because before I started doing the research I'm going to tell you about, I honestly thought that high-graded assessment would have more asking questions. But it turns out to be the other way around. And I'll explain that later in the talk. But well done, I'm delighted to find this. This is really great and shows a difference to any other poll that I've run. But well done, this is really interesting. Thank you very much indeed. So shall I move on now, Tim?
Yeah, I'll stop sharing the results. We've got those so we can summarize them and share them out later. But yeah, thank you everyone for taking part in those polls.
Thank you.
Rachel, I think Rachel will move the slides on. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I gave you the poll, these were the sorts of questions we were asking to our own tutors and other tutors, because what we were looking to build was a system called Open Mentor. And all the systems I've built have always had open in front of their names because I'm from the Open University. Now, this is an open source tool, and it was for mentoring students. And very important, because you all mentioned that, you know, what students are really concerned about is the mark. But if they want to improve their marks, they need some feedback. So we built this system. Can we move into the next slide, please? And what we did was to look at trends in these comments, okay? So we analyzed, this is one particular course, but we've analyzed, I'll show you thousands and thousands of scripts. Here, we've got over 1,000 scripts, and we saw that when we use the Bales categories that I showed you, that most of the comments were actually B comments. That's the sort of burgundy color, and that's teaching comments. Well, if you think about it, that's what the tutor's trying to do, give teaching comments. There were positive comments, some questioning, not as much as I expected, and there wasn't a lot of negative comments, which we were really relieved about, because we teach our tutors not to give many negative comments, but to explain what's wrong in a very positive, constructive way. If we move to the next slide, we also found that here in this graph, you can see what the relationship is with the pass, because you said you'd expect certain comments for the mark awarded. Now, if you look on the left-hand side of the bars, if you start at the bottom, you'll see you've got A passes. A is for the category A, which is positive comments, and the pass 1 is the highest pass. So pass 1 is high, pass 4 is the lowest. Now let's look at the positive comments. Can you all hear me? Because I can hear an awful lot of background noise.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear you. We are following you. It's all right.
Thank you.
I hear you.
So let's look at the...
We can hear you, but not so well.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we hear you.
Can hear you very well.
Go ahead.
We can hear you. Go ahead. We're hearing you.
Yeah.
Please
Go
go
ahead.
on. We can hear you.
Go ahead.
Go
Hearing.
on.
Go ahead.
Go on.
We are getting you.
Let's look at the graph now. And so we're going to look...
You should know if people are quiet, they can hear you.
We're going to look at the bottom corner of the A comment. These are the praise comments. Now, pass 1 is the highest grade. See, we've got more praise comments on the highest grades, not the lowest, which you predicted. If we look at the B comments, that's the teaching comments, helping you get better, you can see that for pass 1, there isn't so much teaching because these students are getting high marks, but most of the teaching comments are for where the students have got the lowest mark. And that's what you'd expect, because you're trying to help them get better with the feedback. Now, if we move to C category, that's the questioning. There were less questions for pass 1, and that was a surprise to me. But you all said, quite rightly, that there's more questioning in the lower marks. And the reason why we found that was because we were being very polite. And instead of saying you should have added X to the argument, this facts, we usually say, have you thought about adding X here? So being very polite about, so it becomes a question. For the D group, we found very negative comments. We've got negative comments, less in the high grades, but on the whole, not a lot. So if we move to the next slide, please, Rachel, we'll see that when we looked at this, and we did this analysis across different subject domains. So we looked at B for business, A's for arts. We used educational sciences. That was the previous graph. So we've used arts courses, maths courses, science courses. We can actually classify the comments according to the Bales categories. So from that, we were encouraged and built a rule-based system. So inside Open Mentor, there's a rule-based system that's the analyzer. So what is we extract all the comments that have been put on the students' assignments because they're all done. Then they're classified, analyzed, and we put in some benchmarks that help you, can be customized according to your own universities and how you want to do this. Let me show it to you. Here's the welcome page, and it tells you about what Open Mentor is, what it does, that it categorizes all the comments because you put the assignment into this system, and what it can tell you is about, it tells you also you can link in to explain about Bales, categories, and how it can be used. So that's the welcome page. And then you see a system where you can upload your courses. You put your course code in and the assignment number, because sometimes we have 4 to 5 assignments per course. And you can put the student number in and their identification ready to upload. So you can upload your assignment and there's a drop-down menu and you can fill that in and ready for the system to, sorry, can you change the slide? I beg your pardon, I've not been talking and forgot to ask you. So then we get to this very important slide here. Now, what this does is it looks at all the categories that the system's analyzed it, but what's important here is that it also tells you grade. So this system not looking at how somebody's graded an essay, but what it's saying is, for the grade or mark you've given the student, have you given them enough feedback? So here, this particular essay that we can see the final results from had a mark of 66, and you can see in the yellow bars, we've got an algorithm underneath because we analysed thousands and thousands and we worked out what sorts of comments, numbers of comments you should start to see for a particular mark. And so you can see with this one, for A, there was very little praise. And for the mark the tutor had given, which should be more praise, there was actually more teaching comments. So this tutor's working very well and giving a lot of help to this student. There was the amount of questioning we would expect, and there was very little negativity, which we would expect too. But what's interesting with this particular example, why I wanted to show you, was the student was doing quite well, but had received very little praise. So this is why I want to move us on to, can we move to the next slide, please? To think about praise as a motivator. And How should we praise our students? What effect does praise have on our students? What does it have on ourselves? And what effect do negative comments have? And what does feedback tell our students about their ability to change? So we're now going to split you up into breakout rooms to discuss these questions. We've got 15 minutes and we'll have a 1-minute warning. So perhaps the technology will work a bit more smoothly this time and we can move into our breakout rooms. So please let's do that. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Can you see the questions in the chat box?
I see the chat box.
All right, while we are waiting for the question to be posted in the chat box, it's not there yet. Yes, hello?
It's not there yet. It's not there yet.
It's not there yet. You're absolutely right. So who would like to be the coordinator, the chairperson for this discussion? Let's start there. Can we have a volunteer, please, to facilitate the discussion? No volunteers. Okay, well, who would like to start the discussion? How should we praise our students? What effect does praise have on our students? What effect do negative comments have on our students? And what does feedback tell our students about their ability to change? So who would like to start the discussion on these interesting questions?
Can you please show the slides once again?
Yes, go ahead. Speak loudly. Go ahead.
Can you please show the slide once again, the slide?
I've just put the questions in the chat. You should be able to see them in there.
If you look at the chat box, the questions are listed there.
Okay.
All right, who would like to start the discussion? Please go ahead.
Yeah, this is Nina. I think we should use constructive means of praising the students. Yeah, we should praise them constructively, give them words of encouragement. We tell them they've done well, but there's a little room for improvement. Those things could
doing. I think at the end of the day, if you had finished the program, you are given a badge for successfully.
We can encourage them and give them motivational ways can be of help. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Very interesting. Any other discussion points on these questions?
And the second question there, what effect does praise have on our students? Praise has a very good negative, positive, it has both positive and negative effect on students. If a good, if an encouraging praise is given to
because if you praise a student
putting in their best, I think the best way to do or the best way to go is to give students the praise that is positive to boost their morale. Thank you.
Good point.
Yes, I also, I'm Remy Saliu from National Open University. I think it's quite important that we encourage our students. And I think personally that psychologically, giving them positive feedback would be a good way to encourage them to do better. So I think this also emphasizes the importance of good feedback from the teachers. You know, so we should have a way to actually tell our students how they are doing in polite ways, such that even when you give grades, you have a system of feedback to each student, maybe through one of these platforms that we are trying to learn in this program, such that our students are aware why they were given these marks. You know, I'm just thinking about a program I normally watch, you know, this channel, the food channel. That's one way they encourage children that are doing food to actually tell them why they did not win the prize. And that really encourages the children to do better in the next round. So thinking about it now, I think it's an incentive for our students to do better when you have good feedback concerning the marks that you have awarded. Why did you score this type of mark? And then that encourages the students to try better the next time. Negative feedbacks, actually psychologically, I think it demoralizes. Even if a student has not done well, we should always find a way to find out why. Why is it, did you, maybe you didn't understand the course, or you needed time to actually study more, and so that the next time you find out that the student will do better. So I think feedback to the students, not just marking without giving reasons for that mark, will really help to have a better output from the students. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very clear and thorough. Thank you. That is really interesting. A lot of food for thought.
Okay, thank you, Oliver.
Yes, please.
Yes, I think I want to speak from the perspective of dwelling on the strengths of our students, especially when they keep to deadlines. When you give assignments, you give them work to do, and they show that they show sign of commitment. Praises people like that should be praised. Students like that should be rewarded with hard work so that they can know that when you do well, you will definitely be rewarded.
The line is off. I can't hear the latter part of that statement.
Okay, I'm just trying to stress that we should stress more on. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Go ahead.
Probably
All
she's
right,
the
thank
one who
you.
has the problem we are hearing.
All right, I'm only
Mr.
stressing that we should.
Off. I can't hear him at all.
Okay, I'm saying we should dwell more on the strengths of our students,
Yes.
and praise them when they do well, when they are committed to what they are doing, and when they keep to deadlines, they should be praised, encouraged to do better.
Yeah.
When we should praise them with their strengths. We should praise them when they are doing well. And those who are not doing so well, we should not condemn them. Rather, every student have a particular strength in them that we can dwell on. So we should try to identify the strengths that every student is having in a particular group and dwell on that strength to encourage that student to do more rather than condemning them when they don't do well. Thank you.
Thank you.
With the issue of how should we praise our students, I think we can do so. We can use citation. We can give them citation. We can give them additional score or additional mark. I think those are the two hows we can praise our students.
It strikes me too that how is maybe also something to think about, is that we should be quite specific. If we just say well done, the student will feel good. But actually, if we can stay well done and this and this, like your assignment was on time, this argument was well formulated, the methodology you followed for this math problem was well laid out, and I could see clearly your thinking. So that specificity, I think, is a key point of how to praise students well in a way that can be both encouraging but also very constructive and formative. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other ideas about how we should praise students? What effect praise has? What effect do negative comments have? And what does feedback tell our students about their ability to change? Any other thoughts or feedback?
Yes, here I am, Peter Kinyanjui from Kenya.
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Yes, I think we should praise the student by telling them how well they are doing in their responses to the questions that we have given to them, or how they are doing in their activities. So positive comments plus some additional information on how they can improve their performance or how they can keep up what they are doing. About the effect the praise have, there is two ways the praise have. Either you overpraise the student, they will relax in their performance. But if you moderate your praise, then the student can be able to moderate also their activities. They can be able to perform ultimately if they are moderated in the way you praise them. If you overdo it, then you discourage them or you disorient them. About the effect of the negative comments, automatically, once I was a student, I know what happened when a teacher commented negatively about me. You switch out of the subject, you switch out of the teacher. So negative attitude develop, and so the student is likely to fail to perform. About the feedback, we should be able to have positive feedback, because positive feedback results to positive performance. But if we have negative feedback, then our students are likely to have a negative change, and therefore the results will be negative. We should always have positive feedback. We should have bumper feedback, enough comments, so that we can direct the student on what they are going to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was great and very clear as well. Any other comments on each other's comments, or a new perspective, or a different question you want to deal with? Anyone?
I think negative comments, as much as possible, should not be used by the lecturers or the teachers, because this discourages the students' performance, and also it creates some stigmatization by the other students to look at this particular student as a failure. There are also other factors which contributes the students' performance, which we are not able to engage or probe. Different students come from different backgrounds. and there are no leverage platform to ensure that they read at the same time, they research at the same time, and all these factors affect individual students. And finally, there should be no condemnation at all. Thank you.
No?
Hey everyone, so I think the rooms are coming back together now. So if everyone could mute their microphones when they come in.
Hello?
Hello, everyone. So we are going to join the main session again, everybody. So please mute your microphone. Thank you for that rich discussion.
Thank you.
And we
Thank
will
you.
pick up the main presentation again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Very much.
I think I'm in your session, not in the main session.
I think we're in the main session now.
Oh,
Denise,
are we?
we're all joining
Okay.
back. It's a slow process. People are trickling back in.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
We had some very interesting discussions and very poignant responses. So I'm really happy that I'm talking to a group of very professional people who know their students, have got their students in the heart of everything, and no praise and negativity can do. And I would like to move on now, if we could move to the next slide, about the research I did about praise and motivation, and which research really affected me about when I started to build something else, another system, which I'll tell you about. But it was Muller and Dweck, Carol Dweck's work, which has now been adopted quite widely in schools and in for sport, actually, to motivate people to do better at sport. And it was this work which Dweck's, Carol's student did in 1998 in USA with school children. And it was with thousands and thousands of students. And what they did is they gave the students Raven's tests. Now, Raven's tests, non-verbal reasoning tests, and they can be very difficult. And the theory behind all this is that you cannot be trained to actually undertake a Raven's test. And that's why they were used in the UK years ago as intelligence tests. Now, what they did is they actually gave the students 3 tests in each school, in each group they went to. And the first test, feedback was praise. And in the second test, which was the most difficult of the 3, there was a randomized controlled trial. Half the class was praised for effort, half was praised for ability. And the third test, it was of medium difficulty. But what impressed me, and I was quite astounded at this really, was on the third test, the pupil praised for effort scored more by 1, and praised just for ability decreased their mark. So being praised for effort and showing about acknowledging effort makes a difference. And we all know when we sit for these doing our PhDs that, you know, 2% of the work is inspiration, 98% is perspiration, and keeping going. So if we could move to the next slide, please. What Carol Dweck, she wrote this book about mindsets, and her work over the years has shown that, you know, for some people, intelligence is something very basic that you can't change very much. And that you can learn new things, but you really can't change how intelligent you are. And for other people, no matter how much intelligence you have, you can always change it quite a bit. And you can always substantially change how intelligent you are through your own effort. And in fact, if we move to the next slide, Dweck has shown that there are people who have fixed mindsets and those who have growth mindsets. And I was very impressed with someone in my own group who said that, you know, you've got to give feedback to people, not to attack them, to their person, but to help them get the task better. So people often with a fixed mindset, super sensitive about being wrong, and they're always trying to prove themselves. And those with a growth mindset want to stretch themselves. They see obstacles as challenges, you know, they're not too daunted, and they have to put a bit of effort in, but there's a lack of tension when they're learning, as they know they're novices and they can improve. And that's really important to try and understand. And at the Open University, we work in teams, you know, building our content, our courses, and we constructively criticize one another, you know, writing comments on the text, etc. And we're good at working in teams. And I think most of us get to learn that the negative comments or anything where there's any criticism, it's not about the person, it's about the work, helping to get the work better. So if we move to the next slide, I'm going to talk about another system, Open Comment. And I've just told you about Open Mentor. And these two systems were about building feedback models, finding a good way, good classification system to analyze what's going on, including socio-emotive support and feedback. Open Mentor advises how to do it, and the system I'm going to show you now, Open Comment, tries to put that advice into practice. And if we move to the next slide, Open Comment was built to, I built it because the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Teaching and Learning at the time wanted a system built that free text could be put in for history students. We started with history students because multiple choice questions, the social scientists weren't too happy with multiple choice questions. The scientists were happy with these, but not people who used to write a lot. So what this system does, it goes in and it looks at how you can detect, it starts to detect errors. And this is something you all mentioned in your groups. Remember when we started, about what are we doing when we're marking? We're looking for errors, trying to see if everything is correct. But what's important with this automatic system is trying to take on board what Carol Dweck's work did. So praising effort. So even if you didn't get something right, recognizing the effort and that more work will help you get it right. So the system can produce a result, a feedback that says you've done well to start answering the question, but perhaps you misunderstood it. Instead of thinking about X, which did not, etc., consider Y. So the first thing that this system did was detect errors. And then it went on to look at things that were missed out. And of course, that's what we do when we're marking. If there's something missed out, we say, consider putting this in. So praise what's correct, point out what's missing, and then there might be another omission. So we'd look at that too. And then finally, what the system does, and it does this automatically, is request clarification, maybe request further analysis, and this is what you do when you're marking and giving feedback. Also to look for the inference. because often students write down something that they're correct, but you as the marker have to try and make the inference from what they've said. It's because something is missing. But also, in this particular system, we check the causality because, you know, the computer system is not a human, not as good. So we could only ask questions where we've got causality. And when I was starting to build this, I acted as a history student, and I found I could only get a C grade, not an A grade. I was very fed up. I'm a scientist by background. I was very cross that I couldn't do well. And I went to the tutor and asked lots of questions. I wanted to find out why I wasn't doing so well. And what I found out was that even in history, when you're asked about, often, you know, in the UK, one of the topics is usually the First World War, and you'd be asked what are the causes of the First World War, and people write, I wrote a long essay, but what I didn't do was actually weight the cause. So, like I would do in science, weighting important factors. So you say the causes are X, Y, and Z, but then you need to write X is more important than Z and Y, etc. So actually, praising effort, acknowledging that people have put a lot of effort in, but that you can change and praise can have that effect. And it's very important now for coaching, as I said, especially in sport in the UK, is something that people are starting to think about. So before I close, I'd like to say, understanding your student is very important. And when you're online and they can't see you, when they get written feedback, they can't see you, can't necessarily come to your room, then, you know, formulate your feedback, but also more importantly, to make your feedback match the grade you're given. So if the student is doing so well, they need more feedback on how to do better. So I'd like to close now with some references that will be here, because I've been thinking about all these, I've built these systems and thinking about feedback, and I've been talking about lately and writing about not feedback per se, but advice for action. Because what you're going to give the student is some advice that they can take forward and act upon to do better, and to encourage them not to just look at the mark. And in some places, people have been experimenting with not giving the mark immediately to their students, but giving them feedback first and then their mark later. Because some of you mentioned that sometimes students don't look at the feedback until they're going to prepare for an exam or whatever. But I'll leave you with some other references, because I put together 5 different special issues. If we move to those slides, please, Rachel. And also, I'm going to hand over to Tim now, who's going to talk about how to move things forward. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you so much, Denise. And I think, you know, if people want to comment in the chat and say thank you, that would be great. And I think that was such an interesting session with the combination of your research and those chances for everyone to have the discussions. So I think that was a really thought-provoking session. What we plan to do, because we're aware that people have asked a lot of questions, and we'll ask more questions in this session as well, is just to bring up a few topics around assessment that people wanted to know more about. So I'll give you a minute to kind of catch your breath, Denise. I don't know if Ephraim is in the session, because I was hoping he would join us for this.
Yes, I'm in this session.
You are here. That's brilliant. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Ephraim Malinga, for joining us. And we have gathered these questions, as I said, from the introductory webinar, and people obviously were interested in knowing more about assessment. We will do another session on this, but I wanted us to have a little kind of discussion now with Denise and yourself, Ephraim, just to think about these questions a bit more. So the first question that was asked in the introductory webinar was really a very big one. How do we evaluate learners online? And that covers a huge amount of ground. And maybe, Ephraim, if you could say a little bit about your thoughts on what's changing and how, particularly in the African context, people are now moving to evaluate online more.
Thank you, Tim. It's quite a challenging area, particularly now when assessment takes place online. But let me start by just talking about evaluating learners generally, which I think is broader than assessment. Yeah. I think a lot of people in Africa have not been using online learning as the main mode of delivery. A lot of the teaching in higher education institutions is largely been face-to-face. But I think with the advent of COVID and the closure of campuses, people have hastened to go online. And therefore, the need to assess learners or students online is suddenly arisen. And I do believe that from what we witnessed, this got a lot of people unaware, both academics and students.
Hello, good morning. Myself, Ritima.
A lot of attempts have been made to put content out on learning management systems and to therefore provide students with all sorts of facilities to enable them to access that content. And in terms of establishing whether students are engaging with the content or not, I think learning management systems are quite a huge advantage, because you can simply draw on the analytics and see who is engaged with the content and how often. And so in terms of looking at whether students are in fact engaging with whatever is put on the learning management system by way of learning resources, people are able to do that quite easily now, in fact more easily, and they realize actually that's one of the main advantages of using learning management systems for teaching and learning. But there have been a lot of challenges regarding the actual assessment of students, particularly when it comes to assessing students on high-level cognitive skills, as well as on the application of the knowledge that is learned to solve problems in new situations. That has posed a lot of challenges. So in most instances, what we are seeing actually is the very simple oracle type of items that are in assessment instruments that are used, which largely require students to simply recall what they've gone through by way of content And if they give that back, they pass, and they pass with very high marks. You cannot, you have no way of telling whether the student has achieved a deep understanding of concepts and deep understanding of skills that can be applied to solve problems in new situations. That is the main challenge. And so I do think that we still have a long way to go, particularly in this part of the world, in terms of getting people to acclimatize themselves with designing effective assessment instruments that students can use online. But I do have a number of issues. Perhaps some of them I will raise them and as we go through these other questions. One big problem that we have is the aspect of maintaining academic integrity in the assessment of students, because we don't seem to have put in place good systems that can give us assurance that the person who is actually doing the test on the other end is the right person. And so we suspect we have a whole lot of things that are happening, including a lot of plagiarism, of course. And students will always take advantage of any loopholes that exist in a system, particularly when it comes to assessment, which seems to be something that causes some bit of uneasiness on the part of students as it contributes towards their completion of their programs of study. And so in a nutshell, I think I can say that, yes, we have started examining and assessing online, but we still have a lot of challenges in terms of maintaining the credibility of our assessment system. There are, I have to admit, there are a few institutions that now have established quite credible systems of online assessment, but I think they are still in the very minority. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was very interesting context. And I think your first point was very good, that when we think about evaluating learners online, we can draw a lot from their engagement with the systems. So we can check whether they're actually logging on, whether they're reading certain pages of materials. This can be separate to a formal assessment, but it does give us an awareness that that student is engaging in learning. Of course, the level of visibility, what we can understand from that may be a bit limited, but it's an important point, and something that at the Open University, we do have systems where our tutors can see if the students have logged on to the learning management system. We have sort of alerts and warnings that are based on whether students are submitting their work, whether they're engaging with the learning. So I think that was interesting. I don't know, Denise, if you had any thoughts on some of the things that Ephraim was bringing up there, some of the issues that currently exist.
Yeah, the notion of plagiarism and academic integrity is very important. And we're hoping to run a session on that because in IT, Chris Edwards and myself were part of a big European project that produced a system that would have different tools to check academic integrity, and there were ways we could use video, audio, keystroke dynamics, because everyone types differently. But more importantly, I think, for that project was the different types of assessments that we could actually facilitate using these tools that would have been possible in any way. So we're asking Chris Edwards if he would have a session on question 3 to help elucidate that one.
Yeah, so I think, as we've said, there's too much to talk about to fit into one session. So I think that area deserves separate treatment. I think today we've focused on feedback, and also to some extent I think that fits with the idea of the broader picture of what we're trying to help our students achieve. And I think it was interesting, Ephraim, when you raised the idea of high-level skills and how we test those, because I think we will find in some cases that online learning largely uses things like quizzes or multiple choice or things like that, which are very good at assessing certain types of learning. And as teachers, we make use of them. In other cases, we really need other types of assessment. I think most kinds of assessment are possible online, but they do take some thought. I would say at the Open University, we rely less on exams as time has gone by. We rely more on students submitting assignments, so essays and project reports and other kinds of assignments, and that they work with their tutor over the course to ensure that we know who that student is, and we know to some extent that we can trust that this is their own work. But a lot of this does depend on the subject area. So I don't know, Ephraim, if you had any kind of examples of subject matter or high-level skills that are particularly problematic.
Not in particular, but it's just a general comment from the general observations that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But we seem to see that disciplines that require laboratory facilities, for instance, tend to pose quite a lot of challenges in terms of testing those aspects that are practical oriented.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have some people now beginning to use simulation experiments and video clips and that sort of stuff. But by and large, that is still posing a lot of challenges.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But also what I needed to point out is that I think it is very true that assignments are designed in a way that tends to depict the educator's philosophy of how people learn. So much depends on how the philosophy I hold about how people learn, and therefore how I should get to know whether they have learned. And I think that largely influences the way I will design my assessment instruments. And this seems to be coming out very clearly in most of the institutions that we work with in our region.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's very important. And the design of the assessment, you know, like you say, there are certain areas like laboratories where a lot of investment and thinking has gone in the Open University about science and how practical science can be taught and assessed, because something like that, there are challenges to replicating what would happen in a physical laboratory. It's all possible, but it takes a lot of effort, and it's not something you can do very quickly. So with the response to the pandemic, it's not the same as having the time to spend to set up a big operation to do online learning. That takes time.
I will tell you an example that we had fairly recently. Mm-hmm. I'm a quality assurer, and we were to try and accredit a distance education program on midwifery. You know, midwifery is a subject or discipline that requires hands-on practice in a lot of aspects of it. And when an institution delivers that kind of program by online, you really want to know how they ensure that those practical aspects are thoroughly dealt with and the student masters the important skills that need to be mastered because they will be dealing with human life out there, right? And you don't get fully convinced that systems that have been put in place can actually equip the students with the appropriate skills.
Yeah, I think in cases like this, in our institutions, it would be working in conjunction with hospitals. So there's a combination of work-based learning. I know from our nursing programs and things like that, it works very well because there's the flexibility of the student to learn, you know, whenever they can fit that in around being, say, for example, a student nurse or a midwife. So distance learning can actually be really effective there in combination with training in a hospital, for example.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd agree. That's an interesting example. Yeah, very, very important to think about the skills in relation to a job as well, rather than just learning online as sitting in front of a computer. But I think we would say from the Open University point of view that online learning and distance learning can combine very well with working. That's what a lot of our students do. They work and study at the same time, rather than, say, full-time study on a campus. Okay. We have probably run a little over time. And I think, as we've said, we will run some other sessions on these topics. And so that's not all that we want to say about assessment. And I think, I hope that it's given you some food for thought. And I know there was a lot of praise in the chat for Denise's talk, and a lot of praise from us for all your contributions today. So I would thank you very much, and I think we shall end the session there.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Good day.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
From my end, guys.
Bye bye.
Well done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ellen.